Hello students, welcome to 10th standard social science class. Hope you all are reading well at home and completing your homeworks in time. So today we are going to learn about history. The name of the chapter is the Age of Industrialization. But before starting the class, I want you to get ready with a notebook and a pen to note down the important points while we are going through this important lesson. So, are you ready, children? So, to start with, we have this chapter called as the Age of Industrialization. You can see a picture over here. So, this picture was actually drawn by a popular music publisher, E.T. Paul. In 1900, a music book had this picture on the cover page announcing dawn of the century. Dawn of the century. So this may come in the picture based questions in your board examination. So please concentrate on this, children. So this is called as the dawn of the century, published by E.T. Paul. As you can see from the illustration, the picture, at the center of the picture is a goddess-like figure. It means the angel of progress. She is holding a flag of the new century. She is gently perched on a wheel with wings, you can see, clear? Symbolizing time. Her flight is taking her into the future. Floating out behind her are the signs of progress. See, the signs of progress are railway, camera, machines, printing press and factory. So this is a picture drawn by E.T. Paul, clear? Somewhere in the year 1900. You must remember the symbols, what they depict in each and every part of the picture. So what does it depict? The glorification of machines and technology is even more marked in a picture which appeared in the pages of trade magazine over 100 years ago. You can see the black and white picture over here. It talks about the two magicians. The one at the top is Aladdin from the Orient, who built a beautiful palace with his, with his magic. So, magic lamp. The one at the bottom is the modern mechanic, who with his modern tools weaves a new magic, builds bridges, ships, towers and high-rise buildings. Aladdin is shown as representing the East and the past. The mechanic stands for the Western modernity. How they are comparing the same picture. See, the black and white, we have two pictures. At the top we can see Aladdin, the bottom we can see the mechanic working. So these images offer as a triumphant account of the modern world. It means the modern world is successful. Within this account, the modern world is associated with rapid technological change and innovations, machines and factories, railways and steamships. The history of industrialization thus becomes simply a story of development, and modern age appears as a wonderful time of technological progress. So actually these images and associations have now become a part of popular imagination. Okay, so do you not see rapid industrialization as time progresses and modernity develops? Because you can see from Aladdin to mechanic, from railways, many things have developed during the course of time. So do you not think that the spread of railways and factories and construction of high-rise buildings and bridges is a sign of society's development? So if you can see this, you can clearly say that the society has developed like anything. How have these images developed? And how do we relate these ideas? Is industrialization always based on rapid technological development? Can we today continue to glorify continuous mechanism of all work? What has industrialization meant to people's lives? To answer such questions, we need to understand or turn to the history of industrialization. So we are going to look at this history by first focusing on Britain, the first industrial nation, and then India, where the pattern of industrial change was conditioned by colonial rule. Let us go to the next slide, children. So what is So what happened before industrialization we are going to see. Proto Industrialization. What is this? Proto Industrialization means a period where large scale industrial production for workers not producing for themselves but for the international market and not based on factories. Let us see in detail what is it. Okay. What is proto industrialization? Clear? So as all too often we associate generally industrialization with growth of factory industry. When we when we talk about industrial production, we refer to factory production. When we talk of industrial workers, we mean factory workers. Histories of industrialization very often begin with the setting up of the first factories. Excuse me. There is a problem with such ideas. Even before factories began to dot the landscape in England and Europe, remember, there was large scale industrial production for international market. This was not based on factories. Remember, clear? I am repeating this again. Even before factories began to dot the landscape in England and Europe, there was large scale industrial production for an international market. How? We'll see. So this period is referred to as Proto Industrialization. In the 17th and 18th centuries, merchants from the towns in Europe began moving to countryside. They used to supply money to peasants and artisans, persuading them to produce for an international market. So with the expansion of world trade and the acquisition of colonies in different parts of the world, the demand for goods began growing. But merchants could not expand production within towns. This was because here urban crafts and trade guilds were powerful. So we'll see what is a guild now. So guilds are association of producers that trained craftspeople, maintained control over production, regulated competition and prices, and restricted the entry of new people into the trade. Rulers granted different guilds the monopoly right to produce and trade in specific products. So this is what a guild meant. This is the meaning of a guild. Now, so these were associated. So what happened? It was therefore difficult for new merchants to set up the business in towns because guilds were restricting them. So they turned to countryside. In the countryside, poor peasants and artisans began working for the merchants. Clear? These have been working for the merchants. New merchants to the countryside. We'll see what is it. Okay. So with the expansion of world trade and the acquisition of colonies in different parts of the world, the demand for goods began growing. But merchants could not expand production within the towns. This was because here urban crafts and trade guilds were powerful. It was very difficult for the new merchants to set up business in towns. So they turned to countryside. As I repeated, we are repeating this again. Okay. Artisans of countryside were willing to work for the merchants. Open fields and commons were disappearing. Cottagers and poor peasants had to now look for alternative sources of income. When merchants offered advances, peasants' households eagerly agreed. This income supplemented their shrinking income from cultivation. Full use of their family labor resources. We are going to see this in detail. Okay, now. So what happened? Slowly, everyone was interested in going for industrialization, working for others. So within the system, a close relation developed in town and countryside. Merchants were based in towns, but the work was done mostly in countryside. Let us take an example here. A merchant clothier in England purchased wool from a stapler and carried it to the spinners. I mean to say, the yarn or the thread that was spun was taken in subsequent stages of production to weavers, fullers, and then to dyers. The finishing work was done in London before the export merchant sold the cloth in the international market. So that is the reason London was known as the finishing center. So this proto-industrial system was thus a part of network of commercial exchanges. It was controlled by merchants and the goods were produced by a vast number of producers working within their farms, not in factories. At each stage of production, what happened? 20 to 25 workers were employed by each merchant. This meant that Each clothier was controlling hundreds of workers. So this was the system what they were following during this time. So we'll see the system over here, how it developed. See a beautiful pictorial representation for you to understand. So as I told you, you'll understand better by looking at this picture. Clear? Now let us see. Merchants were based in towns. A merchant clothier in England purchased wool from a wool stapler and carried it to the spinners. The yarn that was spun was taken subsequent stages of production to weavers, fullers, and then to dyers. The finishing was done in London before the export merchant sold the cloth in the international market. These are the steps of production over there. So the coming up of factories. Let us see what is in store in the coming up of factories. The earliest factories in England came up by 1730s. When did they come up? They came in the 1730s. The first symbol of the new era was cotton. The production of cotton boomed in the late 19th century, which was linked to a number of changes within the process of production. A series of inventions in 18th century increased the efficacy of each step of production. Okay, Richard Arkwright, remember the name? Richard Arkwright created the cotton mill. The costly new machines could be purchased, set up and maintained in the mill. When all the processes were brought together under one roof and management, it allowed a more careful supervision over the production process, a watch over quality and regulation of labor. So all these were controlled because of the invention of the machine. So all were under one roof. In the early 19th century, factories increasingly became an intimate part of English landscape. You can see the cotton mill developed by Richard Arkwright here, and the first cotton mill in Lancashire, England, and the Industrial Manchester it's a drawing by Industrial Manchester by M. Jackson in the year 1857. So the pace of industrial change. Cotton, you can see the pictures over here, children. Let us see what are those. So a fitting shop at railway works in England, the first picture. The second picture depicts the spinning factory in 1830. So the pace of industrial change, how it happened, we are going to see now. The pace of industrial change. How rapid was the process of industrialization? Does industrialization mean only the growth of factory industries? First, the most dynamic industries in Britain were clearly cotton and metal. They were ruling at the time. Growing at a rapid pace, cotton was the leading sector up to 1840s. After that, the iron and steel industry led the way. The new industries could not easily displace traditional industries. At the end of the 19th century, less than 20% of the total workforce was employed in technologically advanced industrial sectors. The pace of change in the traditional industries was not set by steam, power, cotton or metal industries, but they did not remain entirely stagnant either. Seemingly ordinary and small innovations were the basis of growth in many non-mechanized sectors. I mean to say that many innovations were done during this particular period in the non-mechanized sector also. New technology was expensive and merchants and industrialists were cautious about using it. The machines often broke down and repair was costly. So these traders or the industrialists were very cautious because whenever they purchased the new machine, it was giving a lot of trouble. The maintenance cost was very high and it was not working properly. That's why they were cautious about purchasing a new machine. At the beginning of 19th century, there were no more than 321 steam engines all over England. Steam engines were not used in any of the other industries till much later in the century. So in the beginning, these were not used in the industry. Steam engines were not used in the industry. The later part of the century, they were using. So with the expansion of railways in England from 1840s and in colonies from 1860s, the demand for iron and steel increased rapidly. Because railways were started, so demand for iron and steel increased in England. So Britain was exporting iron and steel about 77 million pounds, double the value of its exports. Let us see the next slide. Hand labor and steam labor. What is in store? We are going to see here. Okay. Industrialists initially were not much interested in mechanization. Industrialists had no problem of labor shortage of high wage costs. They did not want to introduce machines that got rid of human labor and required large capital investment. In industries where production fluctuated with the season, industrialists usually preferred hand labor, employing workers for the season. Machines were oriented to producing uniforms, standardized goods for mass markets, but the demand in the market was often for goods with intricate designs and specific shapes. These required human skill, not mechanical technology. Handmade products came to symbolize refinement and class. They were better finished, individually produced, and carefully designed. So, machine made goods were for export to the colonies. I mean to say, people still preferred handmade products. Life of the workers. Many job seekers had to wait weeks, spend some days, and some stayed in night refuges, and they were actually staying in casual wards maintained by what we call for the poor people. At the best of times, in the mid-century, population was extremely increasing day by day. The population was increasing day by day. Let us see what is there for the life of the workers. Okay, you can see the pictures over here. A spinning mill again. A lady is working on a spinning mill. People are standing in a queue to get a job. So, the abundance of labor in the market affected lives of workers. As the news of possible jobs traveled to countryside, hundreds tramped to the cities. Many people from villages came to know that there were jobs in the towns, so they moved to the towns. The actual possibility of getting job depended on existing networks of friendship and kin relations. So if you had brothers or sisters working somewhere in an organization, it was easy for you to get a job there. A reference was given priority. If you had a relative or a friend in a factory, you are more likely to get a job quickly. That's what I'm telling. But not everyone had social connections. Many job seekers had to wait weeks, spending nights under bridges or in night cottages, night shelters we call them. Some stayed in night refuges, as we read here, that were set up by private individuals. Others went to the casual wards maintained by the poor law authorities. Seasonality of work in many industries meant prolonged periods without work. After the busy season was over, the poor were on the streets again because these were seasonal jobs. Some returned to countryside after the winter when the demand for labor in the rural areas opened up in places. But most looked for odd jobs, which till the mid-19th century were difficult to find. Wages increased somewhat in the earlier 19th century, but they tell us little about the welfare of the workers. The average figures hide the variations between trades and fluctuations. For instance, when prices rose sharply due to the prolonged Napoleonic Wars, the real value of what the workers earned fell significantly, and the value of money fell down at a very high rate. Industrialization in the colonies, the age of textiles. What happened in the colonies? We are going to see now. What happened in the colonies? So, let us now move to India to see how colony industrialization started. Once again, we look not only at factory industry but also at non-mechanized sector. Now we will see the age of Indian textiles. So before the age of machine industries, silk and cotton goods from India dominated the international market. Okay, coarser cottons means the inferior variety of cottons were produced in many countries, but for the finer varieties often came from India. Bales of fine textiles were carried on camelback via northwest frontier through mountain passes and across deserts. A vibrant sea trade operated through the main pre-colonial ports. Surat on the Gujarat coast connected India to the Gulf and the Red Sea ports. Masulipatam, yes, Andhra Pradesh, on the Coromandel coast and Hooghly in Bengal had trade links with Southeast Asian ports. So you can see Two diagrams over here. Surat port and the textiles carried on camelback via the northwest frontier. So a variety of Indian merchants and bankers were involved in this network of trade export, financing production, carrying goods and supplying exporters. By the 1750s, this network controlled by Indian merchants was slowly breaking down. Okay, the European companies gradually gained power, first securing a variety of concessions from local courts, then the monopoly right to trade. Okay, this resulted in decline of old ports of Surat and Hooghly, through which local merchants used to operate. Exports from these ports fell dramatically. The credit that they financed the earlier trade began drying up, and the local bankers slowly went bankrupt. In the last years of 17th century, the gross value of trade that passed through Surat had been 16 million. By the 1740s, it reduced to 3 million only. It reduced to 3 million only. So decline of the old ports. The European companies gradually gained power. That's what I told you. They slowly gained power. What happened to weavers? What happened to the weavers? Is an important question over here. What happened to the weavers? The ways adopted by company officials to ensure regular supplies of cotton and silk textiles for the Indian weavers. Once the East India Company established the political power, it could assert a monopoly right to trade. It had a monopoly of trade. It proceeded to develop a system of management and control that would eliminate competition, control costs, and ensure regular supplies of cotton and silk goods. This is through a series of steps. What steps did the company take? Now, let us see. Okay, what steps did the company take? So, the company tried to eliminate the existing traders and brokers by appointing a paid servant called the Gumasta to supervise weavers. So, Gumasta was appointed by the company, the East India Company. So, what was his job? We'll see what was his job. He used to supervise weavers, collect supplies, and examine the quality of cloth. This was the first step taken by the company. What is the second step we are going to see? It prevented company weavers from dealing with other buyers. One way of doing this was through the system of advances. Once an order was placed, the weavers were given loans to purchase the raw material for their production. Those who took loans had to hand over the cloth they produced to the Gumasta. They could not take it to any other trader. As loans flowed in and the demand for fine textiles expanded, weavers eagerly took the advances, hoping to earn more. Many weavers had small plots of lands which they had earlier cultivated along with weaving. Then the produce from this took care of their family needs. Now they had to lease out the land and devote all their time to weaving. Weaving, in fact, required the labor of entire family, with children and women all engaged in the different stages of production. Soon, however, in many weaving villages, there were reports of clashes between weavers and Gomastas. See, the clashes between the weavers and the Gomastas. It is depicted over here. What kind of clashes used to be there between weavers and Gomastas. Let us see. So many weavers had to sell out small plots of land which they now had to lease. Okay, and earlier supply of merchants had a close relationship with weavers. The Gomastas were outsiders. They acted arrogantly, marched into villages with sepoys and peons, and punished the weavers for delay in supply and often beating and flogging them. You can see in the small picture over here. Weavers lost the space to bargain the prices and sell to different buyers. The price now they received was miserably low, and the loans they had accepted tied them to the company. In many places, weavers deserted the village, they left the villages and migrated. Weavers, along with traders, revolted, began refusing loans, closing down their workshops, and taking to agricultural labor again. So the weavers went back to agriculture again. Now let us see this. So you can see the heading over here. Manchester comes to India. So what is this? We'll see. Made in Manchester. Okay. In 1772, Henry Patullo, a company official, East India Company official, had ventured to say that demand for Indian textiles could never reduce since no other nation produced goods of same quality. That means the quality of Indian textiles was excellent compared to any country in the world. Yet, by the beginning of 19th century, we see the beginning of a long decline of textile exports from India. In 1811, 12-piece goods accounted for 33% of India's exports. By 1850-51, it was no more than 3%. It reduced from 33% to 3%. Why did this happen? What were its implications? We are going to see now. As cotton industries developed in England, industrial groups began worrying about imports from other countries. They pressurized the government to impose import duties on cotton textile so that Manchester goods could sell in Britain without facing any competition from outside. At the same time, industrialists persuaded the East India Company to sell British manufacturers in Indian markets as well. Indians were forced, Britishers who were staying in India were forced to sell Manchester goods in India. So as cotton industries developed in England, industrial groups began worrying about imports from other countries. They pressurized the government to impose import duties on cotton textiles. So what are the problems faced by cotton weavers in our country, India? So the export market collapsed, the Indians' export market collapsed, and the local market shrank, being glutted with Manchester imports. See, we'll try to understand now this. The exports of the Indian weavers reduced, the imports from Manchester increased, so there was no point of selling for the cotton weavers in India. Imported goods were so cheap that weavers could not easily compete with them. By the 1860s, weavers could not get sufficient supply of raw cotton of good quality. Why? Because as raw cotton exports from India increased, the price of raw cotton shot up. Weavers in India were starved of supplies and forced to buy raw cotton at high prices. By the end of the 19th century, factories in India began production, flooding the market with machine goods. How could weaving industries possibly survive is a big question during this part of time. Factories come up. We'll see how factories came up in India. The first cotton mill in Bombay came up in 1854. By 1862, 4 mills were at work with 94,000 spindles and 2150 looms. Around the same time, jute mills came up in Bengal. The first being set up in 1855. In North India, the Elgin mill was started in Kanpur in 1860s. And a year later, the first cotton mill of Ahmedabad was set up. By 1874, the first spinning and weaving mill of Madras began production. Many things to remember in this particular side about dates. So let us read it again. So the first cotton mill in Bombay came up in 1854. Clear? Then what happened? Jute mill came up in Bengal in 1855. Elgin mill was started in Kanpur in 1860. And the first cotton mill of Ahmedabad was set up in 1874. So 1874, the first spinning and weaving mill of Madras began production. In 1874, a mill was started in Madras. The early entrepreneurs. So let us see the early entrepreneurs or the business class people in India. You can see the pictures of Dwarkanath Tagore, Dinshaw Petit, Jamshedji, Nusarwanji Tata and Seth Hukumchand. These were the first industrialists or entrepreneurs of India. From the late 18th century, British in India began exporting opium to China. Many Indians became junior players in this trade, providing finance, procuring supplies and shipping consignments. So many Indians were allowed in this trade to China actually. Many invested money. So when they earned money, some of these businessmen had visions of developing industrial enterprise in India. In England, in Bengal, Dwarkanath Tagore set up 6 joint stock companies in 1830s and 1840s. In Bombay, Parsis like Dinshaw Petit and Jamshedji Nusarwanji Tata built huge industrial empires. Seth Hukum Chand set up the first Indian jute mill in Calcutta in 1917. So did the father as well as grandfather of the famous industrialist G.D. Birla. So this is an important slide from examination point of view, children. They may ask the dates. First cotton mill in Bombay. First cotton mill in Bombay. So you can see the first cotton mill in Bombay over here, children. How the early entrepreneurs accumulated cash we are going to see over here. Some merchants from Madras actually traded with Burma. Some merchants in Madras traded in Burma. But before that we can see a picture over here where four gentlemen are sitting over there. They are no one but J.N. Tata, R.D. Tata, Sir R.J. Tata and Sir D.J. Tata. So in 1912, J.N. Tata, Jamshedji Nusarwanji Tata, set up the first iron and steel works in India, Jamshedpur. Iron and steel industries in India started much later than textiles. In colonial India, industrial machinery, railways and locomotives were mostly imported. So, capital goods industries could not really develop in any significant way till the independence. So now, how the early merchants accumulated their capital we are going to see. So as I told you, some merchants from Madras traded with Burma. Others had links with Middle East and East Africa. Other commercial groups operated within India, carrying goods from one place to another, banking money, transferring funds between cities and financing traders. What were the hurdles for the Indian entrepreneurs? As colonial control over Indian trade is tightened, the space within which Indian merchants could function became increasingly limited. They were barred from trading with Europe in manufacturing goods and had to export mostly raw materials and food grains. European managing agencies controlled a large scale of Indian industries. These agencies mobilized capital set up by joint stock companies and managed them. The European merchant industrialists had their own chambers of commerce which Indian businessmen were not allowed to join. Where did the workers come from? So this what happened in most industrial regions where workers came from the districts around, peasants and artisans were found, they never found work in the village, went to the industrial centers in search of work. Most often, mill workers moved between the village and the city, returning to their village homes during the harvest and festivals. Workers travelled great distances in the hope of work in the mills. From the United Province, they went to work in textile mills of Bombay and in jute mills of Kolkata. So, a person called a jobber started over here. Jobber. Who is a jobber? We are going to see here. Getting jobs was always difficult. Getting jobs was always a difficult task. The numbers seeking work were always more than the job available. Entry into the mills was also restricted. Industrialists usually employed a jobber to get new recruits. He got people to his village, from his village, assured them jobs, helped them settle in the city, and provided them money in times of crisis. So these were the works of a jobber. So jobber was a person who was providing job to the people in the village, who were staying in the village, in the factories, in the towns. So he sometimes used to give them advance. So here we are going to see what was the impact of First World War on Indian industries. With British mills busy with war production to meet the needs of the army, Indian mills had a vast home market to supply. Like the World War has just begun, there were many people who were employed in the army. They need many supplies like bags, jute bags, uniforms and many things. So whatever was manufactured in British was not sufficient to meet the war expenses or the war expenses. So Indians also started to supply. So as the demand in England went up, Indian factories were called upon to supply war needs. New factories were set up and old ones ran multiple shifts. Many new workers were employed and everyone was made to work longer hours. Over the years, industrial production in India boomed. After the war, Manchester could never recapture its old position in the Indian market. Cotton production collapsed and exports of cotton cloth from Britain fell dramatically. Within the colonies, local industrialists gradually consolidated their position, substituting foreign manufacturers and capturing the home market. So these are the pictures of certain groups of weavers who were in a better position than others to survive the competition with mill industrialists. The coarser cloth was bought by the poor and its demand fluctuated violently. I mean to say, the inferior variety of cloth was bought by the poor people. The demand for the finer varieties bought by the well-to-do was much more stable. The rich could buy these even when the poor starved. Famines did not affect the sale of Banarasi or Baluchari saris. Mills could not imitate specialized weavers. Saris with woven borders or the famous lungis and handkerchiefs of Madras could not be easily displaced by mill production. Weavers and other craftspeople who continued to expand production through the 20th century did not necessarily prosper. They lived hard lives and worked long hours. But they were not simply remnants of past times in the age of factories. Their life and labor was integral to the process of industrialization. So you can see two great variety of silk, Banarsi brocade and Baluchari saris. Measures adopted by the producer in India to expand the market for their goods in 19th century. Advertisements made products appear desirable and necessary. They tried to shape the minds of people and create new goods. From the very beginning of the industrial age, advertisements played a very great role in expanding markets for products and in shaping a new consumer culture. When Manchester Industries began selling cloth in India, they put labels on the cloth bundles. When buyers saw made in Manchester written in bold on the label, they were expected to feel confident about buying the cloth. Labels also carried images and were very often beautifully illustrated. Images of Indian gods and goddesses regularly appeared on these labels. It was as if the association with gods gave divine approval. The gods being sold was also intended to make the manufacturer from a foreign land appear somewhat familiar to Indian people. You can see sunlight soap, okay, gods over there. By the late 19th century, manufacturers were printing calendars to popularize their products. Unlike newspapers and magazines, calendars were used even by people who could not read. They were hung in tea shops and in poor people's homes just as much as in offices and middle class apartments. Like the images of gods, figures of important personages of emperors and nawabs adorned advertisements and calendars. The message, if you respect the royal figure, then respect the product. When the product was being used by kings or produced under royal command, its quality could not be questioned. When Indian manufacturers advertised, the national message was clear and loud. If you care for the nation, then buy goods that Indians produce. Advertisements became a vehicle of the national message of Swadeshi. See a label depicting the picture of Bharat Mata. See the advertisement. Advertisements have a great impact on the people's perception about the product. So children, with this we come to the end of the chapter of the Age of Industrialization. Hope you are reading well at home. Do complete your homeworks in time. Thank you so much.